Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant, powered by Pro Football Focus. I'm your usual host, Michael Moore, along with our usual co-hosts, Mike Tagliere and Scott Barrett. We're here to bring you all of the Week 2 action, the good, the bad, and the ugly, which there was a lot of ugly out there today, so we will get to it as much as we can. First up, let's jump right in, guys. Texans Chiefs. Texans win 19-12. Not quite the comeback that the Chiefs made last week. Mike, you and I were just talking offline about Will Fuller. I think we have to take him seriously now, right, after his second 100-yard game?
Yeah, the crazy part about Will Fuller is before week 1, I had him in an article for PFF talking about guys that were less than 50% owned that should be on teams. And Will Fuller was atop that list because I couldn't believe that him and Tajay Sharp were not owned in more than 50% of leagues. So after he blew up in week 1, you saw that percentage go up. But I'm still on the bandwagon where I say to sell high on Will Fuller. And especially after this week, I kind of view him as the Deshaun Jackson, like the rookie version of Deshaun Jackson, where he's going to have some serious ups and downs. The reason I don't like Will Fuller that much is just because Brock Osweiler is not very good at throwing the deep ball. Will Fuller's had plenty of volume the first 2 weeks, and I think that changes as the offense becomes more and more efficient. One of the things we were talking about more was that, Lamar Miller hasn't been very efficient, and I think part of that has to do with the offensive line play. I know they were missing Dwayne Brown again. They're still missing another piece of their offensive line. So once that shores up, Will Fuller, I think his volume goes down a bit, and I think he's a bit of a splash player where if he doesn't get that big play, he's going to let you down. So I'm not selling him for nothing, but I'm looking to see what I can get for him for sure.
Well, and Scott, I saw on Twitter you had a very interesting stat on Fuller and rookie receiving yardage.
Yeah, so Will Fuller now has 211 receiving yards across the first 2 games of the season. That's the 5th most ever by a rookie.
Yeah, I mean, ever of all time. That's pretty good.
So I agree with Tags, and I think maybe this is a good time to sell high, but I'm also buying into him as the real deal. You compared him to Deshaun Jackson. I've also heard the Ted Ginn Jr. comp just because, he does have that elite deep speed, and he did struggle with drops in college. But the thing separating him from Ginn specifically is that Fuller's also getting a ton of targets. He had 11 last week, and he saw 7 this week. So I do think that is fairly sustainable. And when you're seeing that many targets, it's really especially value. So you have that high average depth of target, and then offset by so many targets that these are just really valuable targets, and getting so many of them, you're bound to maybe break one for a 40-plus yard play.
Well, yeah, and, additionally, going back just 2 years ago, Bill O'Brien's offense with the Texans supported 2,000-yard receivers in Andre Johnson and Hopkins. So it's not unreasonable to expect that he could do it again. On the other side of the ball, the Chiefs, only 19 rush attempts again. They had 19 last week. Now, obviously, last week they were behind most of the game, so that sort of dictated it. Behind most of the game this week, but not by as much. So, Mike, is this the new norm in Kansas City, or are they just counting the days until Jamal Charles gets back?
Well, once Charles comes back, you have to understand that he's gonna, it's his backfield again. It's gonna be more of a timeshare than most people wanted to say to start the season. But I'm projecting something like a 70-30 split between him and Ware once Charles comes back. But most people don't know that Charcandrick West played as many snaps as Spencer Ware did in week 1. So this was no surprise to us that Charcandrick West had some action in this game. The problem is he's just not as good as Spencer Ware. Spencer Ware is a fantastic running back. He became more well-rounded this offseason in the receiving department. But once Jamal Charles comes back, it's going to be a mess. That's why Spencer Ware was actually in my sell high portion of my fantasy stock market this week, because I felt like his volume was never going to get any higher. And that comes from a guy that I'm actually a Spencer Ware supporter. I love him in dynasty leagues. I think he's a fantastic talent. It's concerning with the workload, the timeshare with Charcandrick West, and then with Jamal Charles coming back. So, I think the Chiefs are waiting for Charles to come back and then kind of use them as a 1-2 punch with Ware as the short yardage back.
Right. All right, let's jump to Patriots-Dolphins. Patriots win 31-24. A lot of offense in this game, unlike the previous game. Jimmy Garoppolo, 234 yards and 3 touchdowns before going down with an injury. He probably won't be playing on Thursday because it is a short week. But first question, Scott, is this proving that Garoppolo's legit, at least for, any time that Brady's out?
Well, I don't think that Garoppolo is legit. I think the quarterback in a Bill Belichick system is legit.
Right.
In 2008, Tom Brady missed 15 games with a torn ACL, and Matt Castle ranked top 10 in pass attempts, yards, touchdowns, and fantasy points.
Oh, Matt Castle. We heard
Anytime you can talk about Matt Castle, you cannot pass it up.
Ooh, yeah. The Patriots were up by a lot. Dolphins came back, but in a lot of garbage time, LeGarrette Blount reeled off 123 yards and a touchdown. Mike, is the Patriots running game just as unpredictable as it usually is, or is LeGarrette Blount a legit running back too going forward?
No, I mean, it's pretty predictable at this point. There's no other power back there. Brandon Bolden's not good. I think that it got to the point where he's a special teamer. That's why he makes the roster year over year. If Donald Brown stuck, I would have worried more about him. But as of right now, you have to. I didn't think LeGarrette Blount would have as big a day as he did this week, just because I didn't think Garoppolo would throw 3 touchdowns in the first half. But man, Miami's defense looked super bad. I mean, you think about it, there was, Seattle in week 1, you saw them before Russell Wilson even got hurt. They were having trouble moving the ball. So I don't know what's going on there. But man, yeah, no, Jimmy G, there was a few good throws he made though. Like Scott, I'm with you that I wasn't the biggest Garoppolo supporter, but on his touchdown to Martellus Bennett, he went through progressions. Like he went past his first, went past his second, came back over to Bennett and nailed it. It was he threw a rifle, like it was just right down the seam. So Garoppolo, I don't think he's playing Thursday, and that's going to hurt this offense. And so therefore, it's just like, do you think LeGarrette Blount's going to be an RB2 at Brissett? No, I don't know. That's the thing. That's the problem where I had trouble trusting him even with Garoppolo. So we're just going a step lower. So, but once Brady comes back, Blount is going to be back in that low end RB2, high end RB3 conversation.
Right. So the running backs on the other side of the ball, Scott, with the Dolphins, I know when you and I talked last week, it wasn't very promising, and it looks even worse this week. You had Arian Foster go out with an injury. He only had 9 yards. Jay Ajayi suited up, which, hey, that's a positive, but he only had 14 yards, which brought it back down to reality. Is there any running back worth owning on the Dolphins at this point, Scott?
Yeah, I mean,
that wasn't very.
I guess, yeah. It's no one I'm super excited about with Foster. You're always going to worry about those injuries,
right?
But if he's healthy, they did look committed to him. And then between Ajayi and Drake, it seemed like kind of a split backfield in Foster's absence.
Yeah. It's just not good. And look, I think if the Dolphins are playing a good defense, you just got to be very, very cautious with any of those guys. All right. Carolina 49ers, the Panthers hung 46 on San Francisco to 27. Cam Newton, his usual self, 353 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. I think probably the bigger story is Kelvin Benjamin, who, for those that didn't think last week was legit, he did it again with 7 receptions for 108 yards and 2 touchdowns. Scott, is he wide receiver 1 material by this point?
I don't think I'd have him there, but definitely high-end wide receiver 2.
Yeah. Mike, what about you?
Man, some of the catches he made were fantastic in traffic. Like one arm, he snagged the one, it bounced around a little bit, and then he pulled it in with one arm. He looks legit, and if the targets are there, it's tough to argue against it. I mean, you look at the wide receiver 1 landscape right now, a lot of the guys have been very inconsistent up there. So I think you have to start considering Benjamin like a low-end 1, at the very least a high-end wide receiver 2, because when you're seeing 8 to 10 targets a game, you're pretty much a lock for that production, especially when you're playing with Cam Newton, who's been, he's willing to target him in the red zone. So, yeah, there's no reason that you should doubt Kelvin Benjamin at this point.
And then Jonathan Stewart, running back for the Panthers, did leave with an injury. Fozzie Whitaker actually did pretty admirable in his place with 100 yards. Scott, is there any, streamer potential there with Fozzie Whitaker if Jonathan Stewart can't go?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look at games where Carolina is projected to win by a lot. Definitely throw in Fozzie Whitaker, I guess, if you need to, but I don't think he has too much upside. Yeah. He did have 4 targets today, which is kind of unlike what Carolina usually does with their running backs. And he did break 100 yards, but not too excited. I don't think right now the injury is looking too bad for Stewart.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's go to Giants and Saints. The Giants win on a last-minute field goal, 16-13. Definitely less points and less yardage and less just fantasy stuff in general with this game than we all hoped and thought it would be. Eli Manning, 368 yards and no touchdowns. Scott, was it you that said he only had one other game in his career where he threw for 300 and no touchdowns?
I didn't say that, but yeah, I know that.
You can take credit for it. Never mind. Yeah, which is unfortunate because, obviously the yardage was pretty much what we thought it would be, but with no touchdowns, that kind of took his value down a little bit. The biggest beneficiary, Sterling Shepard, with 8 catches for 117 yards. Mike, you and I were talking offline. I mean, I think you got to start taking him seriously as a wide receiver 3 or so, right?
Well, that's the thing is, Mike, we were talking off the air about before the season, Moore and I were on the same page saying that Sterling Shepard could eat into Odell Beckham's upside. Like if you're projecting this guy to be a 1,000-yard receiver and, that he's got talent more than Ruben Randall, you had to say, okay, well, Beckham wasn't necessarily seeing huge volume before Shepard even got there. Then you added in Victor Cruz. Both of these guys have outscored Odell Beckham in the first 2 weeks of fantasy. Like not just one and then the other. No. Both of them have outscored Odell Beckham in both games. Am I too worried about Beckham? No. I'm going to go out there and buy him where I can because you could probably get him for a lot cheaper than you normally could have. But I mean, Shepard, you can see that he can play. The kid can play. I mean, it's not just like it's not like a Will Fuller thing where it was like a 70-yard pass that made his week. No, he's accumulating catches. So you have to like him outside of opposite of Beckham because he's going to see a lot of single coverage. A lot of teams are rolling their coverage towards Beckham's side. The problem is, and I'm going to look after this week, is I started getting into conversations with some people today about Beckham's usage in the slot. That's where Beckham does a lot of damage across the middle of the field. So if he's sticking outside it and in 3 wide receiver sets, that hurts his production. So I'm going to be really paying attention to that once the numbers come out for PFF. I know we track all that. So I'm excited to learn about that. But Shepard, yeah, he's definitely someone that you should take seriously as a wide receiver, like a 3-4 type guy, right around that wide receiver 30 to 35 range.
Scott, we had Kobe Fleener, who did not do well last week. He did not do well this week. Is it time to sound the alarm on Kobe Fleener? I feel like we're getting close to the red line here.
Yeah, so I'm just a little confused by Odell Beckham Jr. playing in the slot. He only played there like 25% of the time last year. And only had 2 touchdowns. Did you want to elaborate that on that, Mike?
Across the middle is where Odell Beckham gets the mismatches. That's where you can't bracket his coverage so much because you're mixing him up with linebackers and then the slot corners, which typically aren't as dominant as the outside corners. So matching him across the middle, it just creates mismatches all over the field. I didn't realize it was just 2 touchdowns last year that he had across the middle, but his production per target across them when he was in the slot, I want to say was higher than it was on the outside.
So I actually agree with you. I was mad at the Giants for not using him more like how Atlanta uses Julio Jones. Like when he faced off against Josh Norman, I don't think it was until the 3rd or 4th quarter that they moved him into the slot away from Josh Norman. They were kind of stubborn with him at times, I felt. But yeah, I love that to be the case, but I don't think that's going to happen at all. If that is a concern of yours, I think it's valid just because Victor Cruz was naturally a slot receiver and Sterling Shepard was also naturally a slot receiver coming out of college. Fleener, yeah, I am kind of worried about him. It definitely looks like there's no chemistry between him and Breeze. He had that one ball placed perfectly over the defender's head, and he just dropped it. That would have been a nice catch. I am panicking a little bit, but also quietly hoping that maybe some chemistry comes around in a few weeks or so.
Yeah, no, Scott, I just looked it up. So the yard, it was the yards basically. So his yards per route run in the slot was 3.03 last year.
Oh, wow.
Which was the most in the NFL. It was higher than Julio Jones at 2.93. Julio was second, but those guys are way above. The closest one was Doug Baldwin at 2.46. So you're talking a 20% 25% increase almost from Odell Beckham down to Doug Baldwin. So he does dominate that slot, but if he's not getting the work there, that's what I'm curious to see the percentages from. If he's not getting that, if it's Victor Cruz in the slot, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, and look, that's not to say, that we think Odell Beckham's not going to be a wide receiver one going forward. He obviously is. He just may not be the wide receiver one going forward like he has been the last couple of years. So,
well, Shepard in week. So real quick, I'm just going to chime in. In week 1, Sterling Shepard played 91.9% of his snaps in the slot. Is that right? Yeah. Holy crap!
That could
11 targets out of the slot. Jesus.
Yeah, that could be a problem.
It can be a problem. So, yeah, Sterling Shepard might be moving up my ranks.
There you go. There you go. See, we're changing lives like live, Mike.
That's what happens.
That's what we do. All right, let's go to Ravens and Browns. Ravens coming back to win 25-20. On the Ravens side, you had Joe Flacco, who had a very nice day. I don't know that will be every game for Joe Flacco. What I wanted to talk about, though, was Dennis Pitta. Led the team in targets, 9 receptions, 102 yards. Scott, is this the Dennis Pitta of old? Like, are we going back to the future with this stuff?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not in love with Steve Smith coming back at his age from a torn Achilles. Mike Wallace, I'm not yet buying into him as a real wide receiver one. Kamar Aiken had 1 target, 0 catches. He's borderline droppable at this point. And you saw last year with the Ravens heavily target and feature that tight end, whether it was Crockett, Gilmore, or whoever. If Dennis Pitten's the tight end one, I'm about that.
I think I am too. I had Dennis Pitta a couple years ago, and believe me, it worked out. So I think I have a soft spot for him. Mike, we had Josh McCown, who stepped in as quarterback for the Browns this week. Actually did pretty well before he got injured himself. Threw a couple of touchdowns to Corey Coleman. It's kind of early to say how long this McCown injury is going to be, but let's assume McCown comes back and plays, a majority of the season, if not all of it. Does this boost the rest of the Browns' skill position players, or are they sort of in the same quagmire they were with Robert Griffin?
Oh, no, absolutely. And I'll give Scott credit on this one. We did a show this morning for FanVice, and Scott was saying that he was going to play Josh McCown in cash games, which I thought was a bold strategy. I mean, I liked him in a GPP. I actually started Corey Coleman in a couple places this week. I know a lot of people weren't willing to do that, but I think Josh McCown was better for everybody involved. RG3 can throw the deep ball probably better, but Josh McCown actually gets more quality targets to his players, I would assume. That's what I kind of thought in the Hugh Jackson offense. Now, the part that surprised me was the usage of the running backs, and it continues to be the story, is that Isaiah Crowell is 100%, like far and away the number one in this team. I thought it was going to be like a 1A, 1B situation where they kind of, shared carries and that Duke Johnson would get all the receiving work. But man, look at Isaiah Crowell, 18 carries today. Duke Johnson had 3. So it's not a timeshare. This is Isaiah Crowell's backfield. And Duke Johnson's basically a Darren Sproles of this offense. He's not even the Gio Bernard at this point. So that's a surprise for me. But I hope Josh McCown's okay, because I really enjoyed using Corey Coleman in my lineups.
Yeah, so you're not as confident with Cody Kessler throwing the ball.
No, absolutely not.
Fair enough. All right, well, we will pay attention to that. Next game, Titans coming back to beat the Lions 16-15. You had DeMarco Murray, 89 rushing yards, but I think more significantly, 7 catches for 56 yards. Scott, it looks like DeMarco's like the 3-down guy there. He's catching, he's running, he's doing all those things.
Yeah, I think his day got bolstered by 167-yard run. Without that, he only had 3 more rushing attempts than Derrick Henry. So I'm not as excited about Murray as I was actually last week even, but it was really reassuring to see that he had 7 targets. So he is much more heavily involved in the passing game, at least, than Henry, who had 1 target for 9 yards. And then you saw the week prior, I don't know what his red zone usage looked like this week, but the week prior, he had the second most red zone opportunities out of any running back. He had 2 goal line targets and 1 goal line carry.
Yeah, I mean, they're using him, and at least early on, that's valuable because at least you know that he's going to get some attention. Mike, we've got Marvin Jones, 11 targets, 8 catches for 118 yards, 10 targets last week. You're our resident Marvin Jones truther, so preach.
Yeah, no, Marvin Jones is. I'm a huge fan. I said that this would be the week that people would realize that he's their number one wide receiver, and if you don't realize it now, you're never going to. Marvin Jones, 21 targets over the first 2 weeks, and he's done work with him. He's taken on the Calvin Johnson role in this offense. I've talked about the average depth of target. Basically, every other Detroit Lions pass catcher is under 7 yards per target, like average depth of target, whereas Marvin Jones was up over 13 last week, and I'm sure it continued this week. He was targeted downfield once again. It wasn't like one play has made his week either. He's consistently doing it. It was a fantastic matchup, though. I mean, they were lined up against Titans cornerbacks, Jason McCourty, Parrish Cox. Like it was a dream matchup. So don't get me wrong, but the fact that he's seen 21 targets over the first 2 weeks is really reassuring. I just want to see him used a little bit more in the red zone, because in the red zone, you see them going to Bolden, you've seen them going to Ebron, even the running backs a little bit more than I would like. But we got to keep an eye on Amir Abdullah. He left the game with an injury. If he's hurt, that's just going to create more and more pass attempts for Matthew Stafford, because I don't think they put the load on Dwayne Washington yet, and Theo Riddick is not really great at running the ball, so it could even become more of that West Coast passing offense than it already is.
Yeah. All right. Steelers-Bengals. Steelers win 24-16. First we can talk about Antonio Brown. Had a down day, but I think we can all assume he'll bounce back. That's not a problem. I want to talk about Jeremy Hill. So far on the season, 20 carries, 53 yards, no touchdowns. Scott, where were you on Jeremy Hill before, and are you changing your mind on that?
Well, Hill did score a touchdown week 1.
Oh, my bad. Okay, he had one touchdown. You're right.
The Jets.
Right.
So beforehand, Hill wasn't a guy I was heavily targeting. I mostly play PPR leagues, and he's not going to catch a lot of balls. So I was kind of wait and see. Hopefully, we'll see the second half 2014 Hill, and not the 2015 Hill. And right now, it looks like the 2016 Hill is the 2015 Hill. But then again, you have to look at the games that they've been playing in. The Jets have probably the best run defense in the league. And then this week, they didn't have a lot of good game script up against the Steelers. So I think it's too early to conclude one way or another on Hill.
Okay.
Yeah, this week, just keep in mind, this week he's going to be playing the Broncos, which is not ideal. So, honestly, after this week, you might want to target him in a trade, because after that, they get the Dolphins, the Cowboys, Patriots, Browns, Redskins, Giants. So, yeah, after this next week against the Broncos, when he gets shut down again, I'd target Jeremy Hill in a trade.
You're so positive on that, Mike.
I am. I think Jeremy Hill looks good. I think he's just had some really bad matchups in the beginning of the year. Like, you saw him in the preseason, he looked really good. He's in great shape too. Gio Bernard looks kind of sluggish to me. Nothing too exciting. He made a lot of his plays came in garbage time, Gio Bernard, today, so don't let that fool you a little too much.
Right. Well, okay, so speaking of the Bengals in the pass game, you had Andy Dalton throw for 366 yards, which, by the way, fun fact, he also threw for 366 yards last week in week 1. Is Dalton legit, Scott? I mean, that's a lot of yardage for 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, I'm hoping Dalton is exactly who he was last year before the injury. And this has to be a positive sign if he's doing this without Tyler Eifert.
Yeah, Tyler Eifert. And look, apparently the losses of Sanu and Marvin Jones are not affecting him a whole lot, So, yeah, look, if he did it once, it might be a fluke, but 2 times, that's a trend. So, all right. Oh, one more thing.
Yeah. So, that's also something I kind of was hoping for with the departure of Hugh Jackson. Hugh Jackson ranked top 6 in rushing attempts. Every year he's been an offensive coordinator, so he was always going super run heavy. And I was hoping maybe this new offensive coordinator could kind of let Dalton go out there and chuck it. And he had 54 pass attempts today. I just said the game script was in his favor to do so. But that's definitely got to be a positive as well.
Yeah. Okay, we've covered half the games. Let's take a quick break, and we'll get to the second half after this. All right, Welcome back, everybody. Let's jump to Cowboys-Redskins. Cowboys eked that one out, 27-23. We'll get to the Cowboys, but first, Kirk Cousins. Mike, it's kind of like the same story as most of the season last year with Cousins. A lot of yards, not a lot of touchdowns. So where is he for you at this point through 2 games?
Not good. He really did. He's thrown the ball 89 times in 2 weeks now. Just 1 touchdown. His wide receivers have bailed him out for a lot of those yards. If you watch the games, Kirk Cousins has not been good. Like he looks awful. They're trying to figure out the roles here, though. So it's a really weird dynamic there in Washington because you have Deshaun Jackson, the field stretcher, who's getting frustrated every single play. You could see it on his face when Cousins misses him. He's just like, what the hell was that? He's throwing the ball like Deshaun Jackson runs a fantastic route. He misses him. And then Garcon at the end of the game, when Cousins threw that pick, Garcon jumps up in the air, flipping out, like because Cousins missed him. These guys are getting frustrated. Those are the 2 starting wide receivers. You have Jamison Crowder is a fine slot receiver. Like he could be a good player in this league. And then they're trying to work Josh Doctson in. Along with all these weapons are there. There is no reason that Kirk Cousins should fail. Their run game is weak. Chris Thompson can be used in the passing game. Kirk Cousins is somebody that I was avoiding in drafts. I didn't like him very much. I thought he could be played in good matchups. But if you look at week 1 and 2, the Steelers and the Cowboys are about as good as matches up as you're going to get. And he hasn't done anything with him. So Cousins for me is a streamer at best.
Okay. On the other side of the field, Scott, we had Dak Prescott, who when we talked last week, he looked okay. I mean, I think he looked about as good as you could for your first NFL start. Looked, I think I would, and see if you agree, even better this week. He was 22 of 30 for 292 yards, no passing touchdowns, but did rush one in. So is he streamer material, low-end quarterback 2 at this point, or do you still need to see more before you get to that conclusion?
No, I'm fairly excited about him. Again, I think he looks really, really good. I'd prefer maybe and we saw what we wanted today, where Dez Bryant was heavily targeted. He had 12 targets today. I want to see Prescott run the ball more. I think that's what makes him really exciting. Just look at his college numbers, and they're off the charts. Once I see Dallas maybe become more aggressive with him on the ground, then that's when I get really excited, and he has high QB1 potential, maybe even.
Okay. And in your opinion, is the Dez Bryant we saw today going to be more like the Dez going forward, or the one we saw last week? I mean, I don't know if it's going to be consistent, but, where are you leaning towards as far as which Dez we're going to see?
Yeah, I think it's going to be closer to the one we saw today. And keep in mind, he has 0 touchdowns so far when he leads the league in receiving touchdowns over the past or prior to last season, the 3 seasons before that.
Okay. So I think we're all in agreement. He's probably due at this point. So, all right, let's go to the afternoon games. We've got Arizona, who completely trashed Tampa 40-7. You had Carson Palmer, very good game, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. I know, Mike, some people were a little worried about Carson Palmer, obviously after last season's conference championship. But, it looked good. Well, it looked okay last week, looked good this week. So is he back in that quarterback 1 conversation again?
I think he's a QB1 in good matchups, ones where they're not going to be able to run the ball. I loved Carson Palmer this week. He was my cash play over Eli Manning. And I say that because, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, if there's one thing they do well, it's stop the run. So if you look at David Johnson's final stat line, you can see kind of what they did and what Arizona was able to do. On the other side was the more interesting play for me. I wanted to see how Jameis Winston played, and it was poor. It was kind of to be expected in a way because, he went from a high win in the division at Atlanta, but then they go into Arizona against a team that just got beat by the Patriots, minus Brady, minus Gronk. The stage was set here for a massive beating. And, Winston didn't live up to the tasks. I mean, he's a second-year player. You're going to see that from time to time. But if it's me, I'm actually going to try and grab Jameis Winston if you can. Stash him on your bench because I do think he's going to be a fine player. He just went into a really, really tough matchup here where they kind of removed Mike Evans from the game with Patrick Peterson. And that's always tough when, Vincent Jackson's not the same player he once was. So Jameis Winston was a letdown this week. But the moral of the story for me is that don't take too much from one game.
Right. Well, Scott, on the other side of the ball with Arizona, at least through the first 2 games, it looks like Larry Fitzgerald is the top guy. I mean, he had 11 targets this week, caught 6 of them for 81 yards and a touchdown. Is he the Arizona receiver that people should be targeting for the rest of the season?
No, I think at his age, you're going to kind of see what happened last year, where he dominated for the first 6 games or so of the season and kind of faded down the stretch. So he's someone I'd ride out for another couple of weeks, be really happy starting him, and then maybe towards week 8 or so, look to flip him for someone else, maybe a little younger that I feel more comfortable with riding down the stretch. I just wanted to say about Tampa Bay, Mike Evans had 17 targets, and he caught 6 of them for 70 yards and 1 touchdown. I think that's fascinating. Mike, you said you watched the game. Did Patrick Peterson really shut him down in this one?
Patrick Peterson was shutting him down almost the entire game. And the 1 touchdown, I don't remember the length of it, but it was a longer one. I think it was around a 30-yard touchdown. So if you remove that one play, the stat line would have looked even worse. That play, it was almost like Peterson took a play off. He kept backing up. He was almost 5 yards off Evans the entire time, and that went into the end zone. And then it was thrown on a back shoulder. Peterson had no chance with the way he was positioned for that ball. Now, granted, it was a good throw by Winston, but Patrick Peterson is legit. I mean, the only wide receivers that I've ever seen him struggle with are the smaller, shiftier ones, maybe a Jarvis Landry. He has trouble with those guys, but the bigger wide receivers, Patrick Peterson is typically really good against them.
Maybe you feel bad for him, Mike.
Yeah.
He just had pity on Tampa.
It's possible.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to probably the biggest upset of the day. The Rams beat the Seahawks 9-3. Somehow, Case Keenum beat Russell Wilson. Wilson, 254 yards passing, no touchdowns, no interceptions, only 14 yards rushing. Scott, we had that high ankle sprain injury for Wilson going in. It looked like that probably affected him today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He had 5 rushing attempts for 14 yards. That's kind of a clue to me that something's not right. You said it was an upset, but this is the 3rd game in a row Jeff Fisher's Rams have beat the Seahawks. I don't know how, but here we are.
I take it back then. I take it back. Everything I ever said about Jeff Fisher then. He deserves that extension, by God. But
listen, if no, absolutely not. But if Russell Wilson does have a gimpy ankle, that's a concern to me, because you don't want a one-dimensional Russell Wilson, just like you don't want a one-dimensional Cam Newton. Look at Cam Newton 2014 with his myriad. He had 3 different injuries, got into a car accident at some point, and he was just – and then the next season, he just absolutely lit it up once you gave him once you cleared him of those lower body injuries. I would be concerned about this ankle going forward, and I'm not sure who he's playing next week, but I don't know that he's a lock to start.
Okay. You also had Thomas Rawls go out with an injury, which that is sort of to be determined on how significant that is. But even before the injury, he wasn't exactly lighting it up. 7 rush attempts for -7 yards. No, that's not a typo. He did have 3 catches and 15 yards. By comparison, Christine Michael came on 60 yards on 10 carries, added 3 catches for 26 yards. I mean, it looked like Christine Michael was the better back today, Mike.
Christine Michael has looked fantastic throughout the preseason into the regular season. I actually think he could have won the job last week had he, blew up, but he really didn't. But today was a step in the right direction for him. He played well, but he did drop a ball at the end of the game. It was a fumble that ended up losing them the game. He caught a pass, and then he was going down, and he fumbled the ball right at the end, which is never a good thing. Pete Carroll was on edge all game. Pete Carroll was not in the right place today. I don't know what's going on with him, but he was running into his own players. He was screaming. I don't know. Pete Carroll's a pretty cool guy most of the time. But they have the 49ers this week, Scott, and then they have the Jets, Falcons, Cardinals. So it's kind of like a on and off thing with the Seahawks. Russell Wilson's probably a buy low for me. Some of his owners are panicking just because of what's been going on. Week 1, it was not good. But honestly, if you go back and look at Russell Wilson at the start of the 2015 season, he started out pretty poor. There were people asking me if they should play Russell Wilson or somebody else because Russell Wilson, I want to say it was over the first 4 or 5 weeks where he was like, he was very mediocre. So maybe it just takes some time for him to get into a groove. But the high ankle sprain, because that's what it is, he's got a high ankle sprain, is going to limit him for, as we've seen, anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. So I imagine, mid-season he'll start to get rolling. And October 30th, they play the Saints, then the Bills. So, I would want him for those games.
Right. There's light at the end of that tunnel.
Yeah.
All right. We had Todd Gurley for the Rams, by the way, because that was a big discussion this week is he just this bad? Is he just on a bad team? 51 yards on 19 carries, no touchdowns, 1 catch for 19 yards. Scott, Todd Gurley was obviously a top pick going into the season, but, 2 subpar performances so far. Were we just waiting for him to bounce back, or is this who Todd Gurley is?
He was up against the Seahawks, who have a really good defense, really good run defense. But yeah, I am concerned, and I've been concerned about Gurley since before the start of preseason or regular season. My issue is 2 things. One, he is on a bad team, and I don't see them leading by a lot. I don't see him running behind positive game script too often. I don't feel good about Keenum. I wouldn't feel good about Goff. Defenses are just going to stack the box against him. He's the one good real threat on the team. Like, he paid all this money to Tavon Austin. He did nothing on a ton of targets last week. He did nothing on 9 targets this week, 5 for 50. And the biggest concern is he's not they don't use him on 3rd downs or in passing situations. He had 1 target all game. He had 1 target all game last week. He's just a one-dimensional runner if you're not using him in the passing game. And the Rams are going to be forced to pass a lot. I'm just not – I wouldn't have a first-round grade on him if we were drafting this week for sure.
Okay. All right, let's go to Denver and the Colts. The Broncos win 34-20. Andrew Luck, tough game, 197 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, sacked 5 times. It was the Denver defense, so I think he gets a little bit of a pass here. But Mike, is this just going to be how Andrew Luck is? It's, hey, if he plays a bad defense, it's all systems going. If he plays a good defense, then be cautious.
No, I think that's more of a case of an elite defense. There's only a few quarterbacks that I would trust to play against the Broncos. Cam Newton's one of them. Aaron Rodgers would probably be one of them. But you still have to pull back expectations in those games. The problem here is I still felt like Andrew Luck could be a low-end QB1 because he does run the ball a little bit. He'd scramble a little bit. But the problem is that he lost his number 1 wide receiver in the first half. It was actually in the first quarter. Dante Moncrief, and I call him the number 1 wide receiver because he would have been this game.
I was going to say, that's a subtle hot take, Mike. Good for you.
Well, he had the best matchup because T.Y. Hilton played in the slot last week. Most people don't know that, is that with Philip Dorsett on the field, T.Y. Hilton was playing in the slot. So you had him matched up outside, and Moncrief had the best matchup while Chris Harris would have been on T.Y. Hilton. But losing Moncrief in that big red zone threat, he's the only guy in the receiving core that's over 6 foot. So, that's someone you're going to miss. So, you already had to dial back expectations. I'm not worried about Luck. He plays in a good division to pass the ball. Their defense is so pathetic. He's going to be throwing the ball 40 times a game. So, I'm not worried about Luck. It was just it was a perfect storm. He ran into an elite defense, not just a good one, an elite defense that and lost his number 1 wide receiver. So, no, I'm not worried about Luck.
Scott, we had Trevor Siemian on the other side of the field, 266 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. Didn't play great, but also didn't play bad enough to lose the game. But more importantly, his receivers, and Demaryius Thomas specifically, 5 for 90. It looks like whoever the quarterback is, we can safely draft and play Demaryius Thomas no matter what, even with the injury, too, that he had going in, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I was actually kind of disappointed by the passing game. So they were without Patrick Robinson, who had a concussion. They're without Vontae Davis for a few more weeks. Darius Butler went down at one point. Their other cornerback was a surprise scratch. Cromartie was a surprise scratch, I think. Yeah, he should have absolutely destroyed this garbage Colts secondary, and that really wasn't the case. I'm not too excited. I mean, Thomas and Sanders were fine last year with Peyton playing super poorly. They'll be okay. I just think they lack serious upside.
Yeah,
when in this game they really should have had it.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's actually what I said before the season, Scott. I said that Demaryius Thomas is, he's going to finish as a wide receiver too, but he's a guy that'll get you third or fourth place in your fantasy league. He's not going to win you a title. His upside is so capped. And with Simeon there, it doesn't change anything. Honestly, with Paxton Lynch, maybe I might, bump him up a little bit, but I was more disappointed in Emmanuel Sanders today. Emmanuel Sanders was somebody I thought would step up because Demaryius Thomas was hurting. And probably at less than 100%, but that didn't happen. Virgil Green didn't step up and play very well. So I was overall disappointed in the Broncos offense as well.
Okay. Let's go to two teams that never disappoint on offense. You had the Falcons 35, Raiders 28, which seems to be par for the course for both of these teams and just participating in massive shootouts all the time. You had Matt Ryan, 396 yards and 3 touchdowns. Had a good game last week. I know, Scott, Matt Ryan was, and I wrote a lot about Matt Ryan in the offseason. All his numbers were the same as they normally are, but the touchdowns dropped significantly. Is this the same Matt Ryan that we had previous to last year?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I think it's just too early.
Or is it just two teams that were bad that he could light up at will?
Yeah, I might be leaning more that way. I really thought the Oakland Raiders defense was going to be much improved, and that's really looking like not the case. I said on the Fan Vice show, I think a way to kind of attack them is over the middle. They had 0 linebackers with a positive PFF grade last week or last season. Their slot corner is really, really bad. And you saw Austin Hooper go 3 for 84. Jacob Tamme go 5 for 75 with a touchdown. Sanu kind of disappointed. But yeah, I think this defense might even be somewhat overrated. Smith, who they gave all this money to, just looks really, really bad. I'm not ready to say, Matt Ryan's finally figured out the offense he struggled in last year. It could be, but right now it's just looking like he played a bad defense.
Okay. Well, Mike, let's talk about both running games, which are both fairly murky at the moment. Yeah. The Falcons obviously was a hot topic this week between Freeman and Coleman. Freeman ended up with 17 carries and 93 yards running, so pretty good average. Coleman, by comparison, 12 carries for 46 yards. But Coleman did add the 2 catches for 25, while Freeman did not have a target in the game. So it looks like it's still a confusing situation for everyone.
That's nuts. I mean, like when I was going through the box scores and I saw Devonta Freeman didn't have a single target, I was kind of shocked at that, to be honest. Like I don't know why they wouldn't game plan him in to catch balls out of the backfield. We talked about it over the middle of the field, where the Raiders kind of lack, that Devonta Freeman could eat that stuff up. Like, he's a great receiver out of the backfield. And while Tevin Coleman, he's proved that he's not awful catching the ball out of the backfield, I don't think he's the receiver that Devonta Freeman is. So I'm puzzled by this. I mean, I'm happy to see that Freeman is finally hopefully silent some of the critics out there saying, well, his yards per carry dipped and this and that, because Oakland has a pretty stout front, I get for running the ball. You looked at Mark Ingram last week, and he didn't really do anything against this front. So Devonta Freeman, I never really did panic about him, but I am concerned about the fact that he didn't get a target. I'd like to hear an explanation on that. So if I can somehow get in front of Kyle Shanahan and I could talk to him, I'd ask him, why didn't Devonta Freeman get any passes this game? Because he should have been utilized there.
Yeah, I just tweet at him, Mike, or something. Send a letter.
I don't know if he'll answer, but I'll try.
Yeah,
I'll try.
For the Raiders, Scott, also an interesting dynamic in the run game. You had Latavius Murray with 8 carries, DeAndre Washington with 6, and Jalen Richard with 7. So it was literally a 3-headed monster today. What do we make of that? And are the Raiders just screwing with us at this point?
Yeah, so I'm absolutely concerned about both of the running backs in this matchup. Devonta Freeman only had 59% of the carries. He was once again out-targeted by Tevin Coleman, who stunk as a receiver last year. I'm hitting the panic button on Freeman for sure. Latavius Murray as well. He's a guy I've trashed a lot during the regular season. He was just horrifically inefficient. But I still thought that whoever was going to be the RB1 for Oakland was going to have like a huge role. That's kind of just been Jack Del Rio's thing over the last 5 seasons, having like a bell cow running back who had this huge opportunity despite maybe their lack of efficiency. But yeah, no, 8 carries for Latavius Murray, 7 for Richard, 6 for Washington. That's a huge concern. I'm not on Latavius Murray. I mean, the Raiders have PFF's projected second best offensive line. So I think the running game is going to be efficient going forward. But when you're divvying up the touches like this, you really can't feel good about starting anyone on that team.
Right. Yeah, and it's just confusing. Quite simply. All right. Last game of the day, we had the Chargers 38 over the Jaguars 14. And we were talking about this offline. The Jaguars defense supposed to be improved. Definitely not, at least through the first 2 games. So, Mike, is it going to be the same thing with Jacksonville's offense where they're just behind a lot and they're just going to be airing it out a lot, or what?
Yeah, I'd like to see the time of possession in this game because I watched a lot of it, and it seemed like the Chargers always had the ball. It's because basically the Jaguars were going 3 and out an awful lot. The biggest story here is the Jaguars' offense and their lack of competent ability, because this is one of the easiest defenses to move the ball on, and they couldn't do it. They didn't score a touchdown, I think, until the 4th quarter, and that was Mercedes Lewis, and then they scored with another backup. None of their primary ball, like their playmakers, touched the ball. Allen Robinson didn't have a catch until late in the 3rd quarter. Like, what the hell is going on? Like, I don't know what happened with the Jags this week. It was pathetic. It really was. When you look at the Chargers offense, I don't know if they're legit. Prince Amukamara was already missing from the secondary today. Tavon House, he was the number 1 cornerback out there. He couldn't keep up. Jalen Ramsey, he's still a rookie. I said that while I do anticipate the Jaguars to eventually get better, but there is something to be said when there is so many different moving parts on a defense, the continuity that you have to trust each other, to know where people are going to be on the field. It's a real thing. And the Jaguars don't have that right now. And the Chargers ate it up. That's a team with a bunch of different moving parts on offense, but they were able to make it work today. And, if there's a big story from this game, it's that, Danny Woodhead might be out for the season. It's a definite MCL injury. I don't know if it was the ACL or not. But Melvin Gordon, man, welcome into stardom, because this kid looks fantastic. Like, I liked Melvin Gordon in the offseason. I was touting him as a low-end RB2, but I couldn't have expected the way he looks. Like, he looks fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, 102 yards and a touchdown, and in addition to 3 catches for 18 yards. So, yeah, that's running back 1 production anyway. Scott, obviously they were without Keenan Allen today. The big question was who's going to take over that role. You had Travis Benjamin go off, 6 for 115 and 2 touchdowns. You also had Tyrell Williams have a good day, 3 for 61 and a touchdown. So, going forward, who's the guy to own there as far as Chargers receivers go?
Yeah, I like Travis Benjamin. I was on him this week just because last week all 7 of his targets came after Keenan Lewis left the field with the Keenan Allen left the field with the injury. He also had like a very low average depth of target, kind of making me assume that he kind of implying that he assumed that Keenan Allen role. Targets were split today, 6 and 6 between Benjamin and Williams. But Benjamin's the guy that he paid all that money to. He's the one I'm most excited about.
What's crazy, Scott? I actually just went and looked because I was astonished by Travis Benjamin's week 1 average depth of target. This week it was flip-flopped. Last week it was Tyrell Williams. This week, Travis Benjamin's average depth of target was 16.2 yards. Tyrell Williams was 4 yards.
Wow.
What?
Yeah. So now, do you think he's going to get that Malcolm Floyd role instead of the Keenan Allen role?
That's what you have to wonder is, like, I don't know. They literally flip-flopped. I thought we had it figured out, like, okay, they're going to trust Travis Benjamin as the possession-type receiver. Okay. He caught all 7 of his targets in week 1. And then Tyrell Williams was being targeted, a mile down the field, and he only caught 2 of 5 targets. This week, it's the opposite. Although Travis Benjamin, once again, caught all of his targets. So on the year, Travis Benjamin has caught 13 of his 13 targets.
Yeah.
Wow.
Pro Bowl. That's what that is.
He keeps this up.
All right.
That will do it for this Sunday's games. Everyone enjoy tonight's game and tomorrow. For Mike Tagliere and Scott Barrett, I'm Michael Moore, and we'll see you next time on the Fantasy Slant.